Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jessica Philbin from EBSCO, and I wanted to thank you for attending our WebEx series featuring Ben Gomes-Casseres. We have a really engaging session planned for you today. Ben Gomes-Casseres has been studying, teaching, and consulting on the strategy of business combinations for 30 years. His new book, Remix Strategy, The Three Laws of Business Combinations, published by Harvard Business Review Press, helps managers create new value by leveraging resources outside their firms, using alliances, acquisitions, and other forms of collaboration. Ben has been a professor at the International Business School at Brandeis University since 1995 and previously was a professor at Harvard Business School. Prior to that, Ben was an economist at the World Bank. Ben has published 5 books and many academic and managerial articles. He speaks for and consults widely with companies seeking to create value from external resources and to improve the way they manage business partnerships. Ben holds degrees from Harvard, Princeton, and Brandeis. A native of Curacao, he speaks 4 languages. You can learn more about his work at www.alliancestrategy.com. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ben Gomes-Casseres.
Thank you, Jessica. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to wish you all bon dia, which is how we say good morning in Curacao. So what I'd like to do is give you an introduction to my thinking on the topic, which I call remix strategy, and I'll explain that in a minute. It is the question of how companies can use capabilities outside their firm to create value. And they do this through various mechanisms like alliances and partnerships, and also mergers and acquisitions, which of course are very popular these days too. So we'll go through that. I'll explain to you what I mean and how it can help you and how you can use it in your own business. The book just came out. It is Harvard Business Review Press, and you'll hear more about it if you get some more information after our session. It is a strategy book. My intent is to give you a strategic roadmap to making decisions on the question of how we use external resources. And it has a number of tools that help you along with that. So let me give you a bit of the goals of what I want to do today. So the book itself is a roadmap, core ideas with a wide range of cases. I draw on industries as wide as oil and airlines to computers and software and pharmaceuticals. And so the ideas that we discuss are applicable, I think, to a wide range of business situations. They do need to be adapted, of course, to your own decisions. But the tools that are in there will hopefully help you do that. And I'll give you a bit of an introduction to some of those tools today. So what we'll do today is talk first about what this question is of remix strategy. What does that mean? And then we'll delve into the 3 laws themselves, which are, in a way, the necessary and sufficient conditions to do well to be able to create value with remix strategy. And then how do you apply this? So here is what many of you have in your pocket. This is an iPhone, but there be other smartphones, of course. And it's hard to think about today's smartphone without thinking of the ecosystem of partnerships that iPhone or Android on any one of them have in terms of the application. So they only function the way they do because there are many other companies, people, individuals, entrepreneurs building pieces that all are working on the platform of the phone. So that's one form of leveraging external resources. And of course, at a more hardware level, there is the whole telecommunication network, which, as we know, when the iPhone got started, it was launched between Apple and AT&T, and AT&T was the first provider. And so this was a very clear strategic alliance, you might call it, that was needed in order to get this product into the market. And also, Apple needed, of course, hardware components. It worked and still does with Samsung, even though they are competitors in other areas. And so thinking about the smartphone or really any other important technology that we have today, it's hard to think about that without thinking about the external deals that any of these providers have in order to make their product viable. And of course, this kind of deal making proliferates. Of course, Apple doesn't just run on AT&T, it runs on other telecoms too. This is what I mean by remix. The remix idea comes from music. In the music world, a DJ or a composer can take different tracks from different music songs and mix them and create something new. And so you'll have the song, the drum beat from one, and you'll have the guitar riff from another. And by mixing them together, you get a new piece of music. And this is no different from many other types of recombinations that are very common in art, like collages. Any kind of collage is a remix of existing pictures. So you get the idea. And what I try to do in the book is to say that really this is what a lot of businesses do when they use external deals to bring in talent, or to bring in a know-how, or to bring in a piece of intellectual property, or to bring in production capability or marketing capability. And so when you think about what you need to do to succeed in a particular market, usually you can't do it alone. And so in today's world, the idea of bringing in outside, or at least making access to outside resources, whether you buy them or borrow them or lend them or something else, that's the process of remix. How do you create value by leveraging external capabilities? So another example of this, to show you that this is not just startups, Disney, this is a picture of Bob Iger, the head of Disney at the moment, and this article describes how Disney remixed itself, because going back 10, 12, 15 years ago, it was struggling with the possibility of using computers in its animation, and it really did not make any headway. It was failing at that, and its movies really were not successful. At the same time, it started a partnership with Pixar. Again, it's the same Steve Jobs kind of spirit, maybe, but Pixar was a very small company at the time that invested in software to make animated movies, but also was developing its own story-making capabilities. At the same time, Pixar itself did not really know how to do this. And so they had an alliance, a partnership with Disney that basically taught them how Disney makes stories and movies. And at the same time, Disney learned how Pixar makes these computer-animated characters. And the result of that was Toy Story. Toy Story was a blockbuster movie, and in fact a milestone in the development of this kind of media. And of course, it's been followed after that with several other Disney Pixar collaborations. And over the years, that collaboration between these two companies became tighter and closer to the point where Disney, in fact, acquired Pixar back in 2004. So that started as a partnership, developed into a deeper relationship, and then ended up as an acquisition. And what you see from that, and before I move on that topic, basically Disney does this with many other companies also, and this article is about how it has been able to remix and transform itself by using these external deals with Lucasfilm, Marvel, etc. So that's the Disney example. There are many other industries where this kind of thing takes place. This is just one of the more common ones that we all know from travel, and that is that in global travel, you now have three large groups. I call them constellations. A constellation is a grouping of firms that together try to offer a service, and they do that not because they own each other, but because they are allied with each other. They are partners, and they have structures of dealing with each other that are short of full ownership and full control. And so you have Star Alliance, One World, and SkyTeam all being these kinds of groups. And increasingly, I find that there are many industries where we have competition of a group versus another group, rather than a firm versus another firm. So it's not just United competing against American, it's Star Alliance competing against One World. And as part of that constellation, there are these companies. So when you think about your own industry, it pays to think about whether or not you really are in an environment where it's mano a mano, one firm against the other, or it's my team versus another team, my constellation of allies versus another constellation of allies. And the book applies the three laws, which I'm going to get into in a minute, to understanding not just bilateral deals between one company and another, but also these multi-partner groups, these multi-partner constellations. And we'll talk more about these three laws in a minute. So to summarize what I've said so far, business combinations come in all shapes. And these are the words that very often are used: ecosystems, open innovation, strategic alliances, co-development, co-this, co-that, and of course partnerships and M&A. And in my view, they all share the same objective of trying to create value by remixing resources and capabilities. The question is, they're structured differently, they're managed differently, and of course they cost differently, and the risk reward of each one is different. So how do you think about the choices that you have to make, and what is the strategy that needs to be pursued in order to make these deals work? And one of the underlying sort of philosophy I have, which I've developed over the many years of working in this field, is that the strategy behind a deal is often more important than the deal itself, or than the details of the deal itself. It's what you do in the process of deciding when and where to cooperate. It's what you do in terms of how you cooperate over time. And in a way, it's the strategy beyond the deal as much as the structures and the terms of the deal itself. And I'll show you some of what I mean as we get through the laws. So now I'm going to move into my view of the world. I have a lens with which I look at the whole world. It happens to be a prism and not a lens of the normal kind. And of course, the prism then can split any single light into many different colors. In my word, I split any acquisition. When I wake up and see which is the latest merger that was announced yesterday, right away I apply this prism to it to understand the logic behind it and the strategy behind it. So let me explain to you what those prisms are. The prism basically splits everything into three laws. The three laws of business combinations. The book is organized along that. There's a deep chapter on each one of them, and then there's ways to combine the three of them. Let me tell you what they are. The first one, you've heard, 1 and 1 is 3. And this is sort of a cliche in a way, but it's a cliche that is very hard to actually make happen. And the idea, of course, is that by putting together two different assets or capabilities, we can, maybe if we do it right, we can create more value than each of them can do on their own. And what this is really is a potential. I call it the potential joint value. So the combination must have that potential to create more values than the parties can alone. And so this means looking carefully at what is the impact of scale. Does it matter that we have a larger scale? Does it matter that we have a complementary piece of technology that we didn't have before in the combination? Does it give us a different relationship to our customers or to our suppliers when we're larger? And so this is the potential for joint value creation that is the fundamental requirement for success. The second is, how do you make this potential real? And for that, there's another formula, which is 1 and 1 is 1. And of course, I don't mean that the value now has been reduced to 1. What I mean by that is that the management of this combination needs to be one, needs to be unified, or at least aligned, or at least non-conflicting, so that the parties have to be working together well enough. So I call this the law of governing the collaboration. The combination must be designed and managed so that you can actually realize that joint value that you potentially created by coming together. So these are the first two rules. And then the third one is perhaps a little bit more controversial or sensitive in many of partnership conversations. And that is that 1 and 1 equals 1.4 plus 1.6. Or it could be 1.5 plus 1.5, or 1.2 plus 1.8. The idea is that the value that we created up in the first law, the 3, needs to be divided. We have to split the pie. We have a larger pie, but we still have to cut it, and each of us has to earn our share. And that's extremely important, because we won't put in our investment if we don't know that we get a fair share out of it. What that fair share is doesn't have to be 50-50 at all. It depends on what we contribute and, in a sense, on our bargaining power in the relationship. So this is the rule that says the value has to be shared. And I think what's important here is to understand that that is the motivation for the firms to contribute to collaboration. And if they don't contribute, then obviously we don't get the combination of 1 and 1 is 3. And all of these together fit in this prism, in this triangle, pyramid, because they all relate to each other. You cannot think about the joint value without knowing how to collaborate, govern it. And of course, if you share the value, you're basically sharing the value that is created at the top of the pyramid. And so a lot of what we discuss in the book, and in fact, in practice, in putting any ideas in practice, it's the interaction between these that often are the tricky things to do. How do we apply these ideas? So I'm going to use a few of the tools that are in the book to show you what they are. And we'll focus first on the questions around designing a combination. How do you identify this potential joint value? How do you structure it? And how do you select a partner? These are three very classic questions that need to be addressed. And managers know these are important, but often they lack a tool set. What I found in my work with managers over the years is that they very often understand that it's important to go outside the firm to get assets or talents or skills or know-how. But it's often not clear how to do that. Most of us are not trained or raised in a way with that philosophy. We're raised and trained in the idea that management controls what it does, and so it's hard to do business differently. And in many companies, the control element is strong, and it's hard to be sharing with outsiders. So what I do in the book is sort of demystify that by showing you first that it's important, that there are laws that govern how to do that well, and then to really give you some tools that make it fairly accessible, I think, to right out the box, to be able to make some decisions. And these are three of the key decisions that I think are important right from the beginning. We'll focus a little bit after that on managing a combination, the process after the deal is signed, if you will, and then I'll end with a few of the habits that I've seen that are successful in this world. So as I already mentioned in passing, the first thing about any combination, whether it's an alliance or a merger or something looser or bigger, it's basically these three questions. What is my goal? What is that outcome that I'm trying to get? And that's a very strategic question. And for that, we need to kind of harken back to what the company's competitive advantage is in order to know what it is that we can reach for. Then when we have that idea, the next question is, well, who do we play with to make this happen if we determine that we don't all have the capabilities in-house? So the question of partner fit, partner selection, or partner assessment is critical. And finally, the structure of the deal. Notice I say finally, because in a way, it is the thing that follows after the first two are clear. Very often, we tend to have a tendency to go focus on the structure maybe too quickly and worry about the details or whether we have majority or minority owned control, things like that. Those are important. They're very important. But to first get the strategy, the goal straight, then understand who the best partner is, and then finally, let's find a way to structure this collaboration. So this is one of the tools that helps you delve inside your firm to identify sources of joint value. And for that, I use an idea which is called a value stack. It's sort of like a value chain, but it kind of breaks the value chain up vertically by taking apart the pieces of the company that create competitive advantage. So is it our assets, our intangible assets, or our tangible assets? Is it something we have as a capability, our know-how? Or is it actually the activities, the way we particularly do things? So let me give you another example from Disney about how to think about this. This is a chart, which is very old, 1957. Is when Disney drew this very early on, and it shows the way it thought of its key capabilities or its key activities and how related all of these are. And what's striking here is, of course, that a lot of this is still the same, that this is a company that continues to be driven by creative talent around film, that then finds ways to use it in merchandising or in publications, that, of course, does a lot with its own entertainment parks like Disneyland and TV, which was a little corner at the time, now is bigger perhaps. But you see all of the elements that we now know as Disney in a way existed before, and I guess it's funny to see little Mickey Mouse running back and forth with film. That tells you that they are exchanging ideas, they are finding ways to create linkages amongst their assets on their value chain. So that's really what happens in any company. When you have brands or technology or certain skills, the links between them are very important, and that's really what creates a total combination that is valuable in the market and creates value. when we think about combinations with other companies, it's important to compare this with a potential partner. So here you have two, I will call them complementary businesses, because business A has strengths in two of those boxes and business B has strengths in the other boxes. And this is, of course, the idea that we try to combine the strengths of different companies in order to create something better. And this is, in a way, the essence of what it is to create 1 and 1 is 3 or joint value. Of course, this is in the abstract. One has to drill down into your own company to understand what are those assets. If you're in a pharmaceutical company, well, those assets are certain molecules or certain treatment procedures. They may also be certain capabilities of being able to do tests or being able to get approval from regulatory agencies. And of course, there's marketing. That's another capability that pharmaceutical companies or other companies all have. And what matters is to combine this. And so if you're a large pharmaceutical company dealing with a small biotech company, clearly they're providing one piece of this stack and you're providing another piece of the stack, and it's the combination of the two that creates more value. So that's one tool number 7 in the book. And the next question is, how do we structure this? And so we've kind of thought about partner choice a little bit. We'll come back to that in a minute. But let's think about the various choices of how to structure the relationship. And here I have a chart showing on the horizontal axis the extent of joint decision making. It pays to think about that a little bit. When you're working with a partner or another collaborative, any kind of structure, there are decisions that you make about your business and there are decisions that they make about their business. And the question is, do we need to talk to each other a lot to make sure that our decisions line up with yours? Or do we just do our thing and they do their thing and somehow it'll all come together in the end? And you realize, of course, that for many deep collaborations, you have to have a lot of joint decision-making to make sure that the things work. So when we array, and the vertical axis is a question of time, how deeply and long are we involved with each other? When we array different kinds of relationships, these are terms that are very common. They may be used in your company and they may be used differently perhaps. But you can see on the bottom left, there are sort of just purchases, competitive purchases, and on the top right you have very deep integration, and in between you have things that are co-this or co-that, collaboration of various sorts. And so on the left, really, those are market transactions. Those are buy-sell kind of relationships. It's probably not so productive to call them partnerships. They are more like vendor relationships, which is okay. That doesn't mean that they're not good. They also create value. A lot of value is created by excellent vendor relationships. And then on the top right, we have acquisition or a full merger. And again, a lot of value can be created if this is done well. And everything in between is the area that I've been working on for 30 years, which is alliances. We call it alliances. I'll give you the definition in a minute. But basically, it's partnerships that are short of the full acquisition and deeper than the market transaction. And if you think about what's behind each of these boxes, it turns out that on the two ends, we have complete control, either because politically we own them, that would be the merger case, or because we have contracts that are very complete. I'll come back to what that means in a minute. In between, we have something which are called incomplete contracts, which I'll show you in a minute, and shared control. And that's the difficult part that most of us aren't trained necessarily to manage that as well as we are to manage the two extremes. And most companies have a bias for the two extremes of this spectrum, and actually don't do themselves any service because they are not able to play well in the middle. And today, in more and more industries, it's important to be able to play well in the middle, in the alliance zone, as well as in the acquisition and the vendor zone. So let me show you what I mean by the idea of an incomplete contract. The spirit of every alliance, and this is really the core of what it means to have a partnership, is that we start with something which unfortunately is incomplete, not because the lawyers didn't do a good job, but just because the world is more complex and there's only so much that you can put on paper. And then what happens is that there are going to be unforeseen events, external events, internal events, maybe changes in strategy, maybe changes in the CEO, maybe a change in ownership. And that means that we now need to make a new decision because it wasn't covered in the original contract, in the original understanding. And so the job of making that new decision, which I referred to earlier as making joint decisions, is actually one that doesn't end there because it continues over and over again as more unforeseen internal and external events happen. And those of you who are managing alliances or whose company has alliances that need to be managed by alliance management or relationship managers live down here. Down here in the new decisions component is where there's a lot of new management decisions that have to be made to keep the relationship going. We call this a relational contract. And so this is a part of the book where I try to draw really on theory of law and economics. And this is the kind of theory that has garnished 2 Nobel Prizes already to Ronald Coase and to Oliver Williamson. And I don't go into the detail of the technicalities, but I want to make this accessible to managers. So we need to create a way to manage these unforeseen events by creating a governance structure, a way to make these joint decisions that allows us then to continue this 1 and 1 is 1, because that's what creates the 1 and 1 is 3. It's only by managing this kind of spirit of the alliance that we can get the joint value that was promised in the first part. So very quickly, just now that you've seen a little bit of the flavor of some of the tools, this is another one, and I really won't stop too long here, but just to say that in the process of assessing a partner fit, again, we need to think about the 3 rules, which are sort of on the left-hand column here. What is the potential for joint value? What's complementary? What does each party have that the other one doesn't have? That's the first step. The second step is, can we work together to make this happen? And that means, do we need to have similar attitudes and strategy? They don't have to be identical. Even the culture doesn't have to be identical. I'm happy to talk about that if you wish later. But we need to have a common vision. We need to have avoidance of too much rivalry or competing interests. These are the things that keep us aligned so that we can create value. And then the third part is, what are the returns? Are there acceptable returns that provide incentives on both sides? And that very often has to do with what are the prices, the transfer prices or the sale prices that are being used? What is the profit sharing that's being used? And in a way, how does the market value each contribution from each of the partners? So again, this is another quick tool which I'm just showing you here so that you get an idea of how we apply these rules in reality. So let's move a little bit further now. Having designed an alliance with the earlier approaches, how do you manage this over time? And it turns out that what you plan is not what you get. You plan it, negotiate it, and start investing. And over time, it turns out that the operation is quite different than what you thought. This is very, very common in every partnership I've looked at. There have been mid-course adjustments and sometimes restructuring. To the point where the alliance might actually be closed if it doesn't work out, but other times it can be expanded. And alliances are often an option that we can use to expand or contract depending on how things in fact evolve. So in this combination management, it's tricky because we have to manage 2 tracks in order to make this work. The first track is the business itself. So every party in this operation has certain things to do: sales, R&D, marketing, etc. And obviously we have to plan together, commit the resources, have a strategy, and then monitor the results. If you wish, these are just the usual business that anything either inside the company or with a partner would have to go through. In the case of collaboration and a combination, there's the additional track, which is the relationship itself. So how do we synchronize those attitudes? The vision, the goals, how do we keep that going? Sometimes there's emotions. How do we feel about the other party? How do we feel about what we're earning or what they're earning? And how do we communicate about this to make joint decisions? So what you see here is that managing that relationship after the deal is done is a process of managing both of these components. So finally, very quickly, the habits that I've seen that really work here are, in a way, a combination of what we've seen. The first one is there has to be very clear incentives for collaboration at all levels. So every player in the business has to be able to see the value that is being created. It's important to define clearly what's in it and what's outside of it. So if we cooperate in one area, do we compete in another area? Well, that's very possible. Today, that's very common. In that case, let's be very clear about what it is we do plan to do together and what we don't. What are our roles and responsibilities? But be clear about it, otherwise the partnership will not work. And of course, the process of joint decision making, I mentioned this already in passing quite a bit, but that pays to be very careful about and make sure that it's set up right. Then, as I just mentioned, manage both the joint business as well as the relationship, and over time, build and maintain trust. This is a tricky word because we tend to load a lot on it, and obviously we want to be in a situation where we can trust each other. But at the same time, we can't just rely on trust, on personal trust, like between friends, because people change and companies have their own interests. And so over time, what matters is to build an organizational structure where both sides can communicate clearly and therefore the organizations as a whole, in a way, are building trust. And finally, invest resources in this relationship management. As I said, this is a very important part of keeping the project going, and very often, probably the most common cause of failure is the lack of sufficient resources in relationship management, in managing the new combination. And so it pays to do that well. Companies that have gone through doing this well and become successful remixers put very specific resources, people, time, effort, money into managing the relationship, and that is what keeps them together and what keeps them rowing like this. Eventually, we want to all be going in the same direction, and of course, it requires that kind of management, and we don't want everybody to be pulling in a different direction, and there are alliances and partnerships and mergers that have ended up this way, where the word forward means something very different for each one of them, and that's what we would like you to avoid. And hopefully, the book itself, maybe not this presentation, it's too short, but the book itself, the chapters build on each other. There's also a summary available that Jessica will tell you about in a minute. But the book itself will help you achieve that joint value, creating the joint value by applying the 3 rules, which will allow you to govern and then share the value in an equitable way.
Great. And thank you, Ben, so much for your insights and presentation.
Thank you. So before I leave, let me just repeat the last part. My email is there, and I'd be very happy to carry on this conversation with anyone here. My help desk is open. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.